Time now to join Frank O'Callaghan for the next instalment of the series Dundalk's Radio and Television People. Part 18. Frank O'Callaghan and Alan Byrne chat about the genesis of the idea, the research and the development of bringing the contributors together for an exhibition and a slideshow presentation in the AV Theatre in the County Museum, Dundalk. Frank researched the manufacturing facilities of GEC in Dunleer and Reynolds Electronics Dundalk and the TV and radio distribution and service dealers in Dundalk. Our contributors talked about their experiences as technicians, the electronics classes at the Regional Technical College and about lasting social connections. Contributors were Tom Lamb, Frank Byrne, Des O'Loughlin, Damien Halpenny, Noel McCann, Aidan McCann, Stephanie Cumisky, Nee McCann, Rory Hall, John Fox and his sister Margaret Gamble, Nee Fox, John and James McLaughlin and James's children Daisy, Sive and Adam, Deirdre McCardle, John McCardle, Brian O'Neill, Ursula Tennyson, Nee Maguire and her brother Jackie Maguire, Terry Sloan, Peter Traynor and Frank Baldwin. Thanks to Brian Walsh and the staff at the County Museum Dundalk for the facilitation of the recordings in parts 1 to 4, along with the TV exhibition and refreshments, and to Jim Curley for his assistance with the PowerPoint, and also to Nigel Curtin and the staff at the Louth Reference Library, Dundalk. The presentation from the County Museum included photographs from John Fox, County Library Dundalk, the Dundalk Democrat, Rory Hall, Des O'Loughlin, Old Dundalk by Victor Whitmarsh, The McCann Family, Some Dundalk Days by Victor Whitmarsh, Liam Gaynor, who supplied a football programme for Dundalk versus Liverpool in Lansdowne Road, 30th of July 1980, Fintan Harmon's book It Was Sunshine and Laughter All the Way, about memories of working in GEC Dunleer. The businesses mentioned in the series included John McCann, Stapleton Court, The Ramparts, Canis McManus, 1-2 Park Street, Audiocom, 54 Park Street, Bernie's Master Vision, Park Street, John McCardle, 74 Park Street, Universal Radio and TV, 100 Park Street, RQ O'Neill's, Earl Street, RTV Rentals, Earl Street, Electrotel, Market Square, Jack McCann, 22 Clanbrassil Street, Cavendish, Clanbrassil Street, Irish TV Rentals, 85 Clanbrassil Street, Farney Furnishers Limited, 65 Clanbrassil Street, Des Downey, 12 Francis Street, The Radio Depot, 10 Jocelyn Street, Benny Maguire, 15 Church Street, Peter Traynor, 17 Bridge Street, W.P. Baldwin, 82 Bridge Street, GEC Showrooms, and McGahan and O'Neill, Castletown Road. Reynolds Electronics, Bachelor's Walk, Jocelyn Street, The Ramparts, Pierce Park, and Finnebar Industrial Estate.
Frank, when I thought of the idea, or when the idea probably planted in my head, about finding out about the radio and TV people that worked in, I suppose, the dealerships and the different factories in Dundalk. I was trying to figure out why that idea kind of sat in the back of my brain so long, or where the idea came from. And eventually I said it to you and it took a life of its own. But I suppose maybe I just wanted to maybe go back to the early 1960s and live a life for a day. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, but I don't go back that far.
So my dad, he said he was 1961 when he was putting up aerials. I just have a picture in my head of him, climbing the ladder, standing up, looking out over the town as such, and imagining the signal coming down from Claremont or whatever it was. It was like wisdom coming down from the Cooley Mountains and bringing it into all the houses. And then, as a result of that, maybe people saw something on television, maybe London or Manchester or Paris, and decided, I want to see a little bit more of the world. I think that was the crux of it.
Well, actually, it was a nice picture to have. Your dad growing up watching out over the town of Dundalk, and how much it has changed in that last 60 years, as well as everything else.
Yeah.
But a nice picture to have of your dad, and a nice picture to have of the concept that you had in mind, actually.
Yeah, it's all about the power of the imagination. And that's and here we are in Dundalk FM radio studio. Yes, okay. So that idea had been sitting in the back of my mind, but all I knew really was my own dad, who'd worked in GC and I'd worked in Reynolds, but I didn't know anybody else really. And we've been doing a few bits and pieces over the years, documentary-wise, and I don't know why I asked you, but I know that you are a very conscientious researcher, and that's been proven with your Park Street and Dundalk Bay Tragedy projects in 2025. In my mind, I thought you always like to be busy, so I said, I'll throw this at Frank and see if it sticks. Yeah. So I asked you, Frank, I have an idea in the back of my head, and I said it to you, and do you remember what you said?
Oh, I very much remember what I said. I said no. It was probably the strongest two-letter word I've ever used, no, and I was adamant and definitive about it. And if I could, I'll tell you why. Because It came out of nowhere on the night. There was no pre-discussion about it. I had no idea what the concept you had in mind. Now, I hear what you're saying, and I know what the television and the radio people in Dundalk, I knew the names and stuff, but I'd never done anything about researching them or looking at them straight in the face and saying there's a program there. In some other things I've done, I might spend a period of time looking at something and saying, is there a program there, or is there a presentation there, or is there something that people would be interested in, or would I just be spending months wasting my time? So I said no. So that's what happened. I said no because I didn't understand the depth of what you had in mind or the value of it either.
Maybe, to be honest, I hadn't worked it out either completely, but I was interested in hearing the stories from people. I was really interested in finding out what it was like to be maybe in your 20s, early 20s, working in this, I suppose, new and exciting sector, electronics.
Certainly different.
DIY, where people were as enthusiastic as they were maybe about as following a football team. I mean, it taken over their lives, and they were surrounded by peers who are obviously interested in, maybe you wouldn't say furthering their career, but definitely furthering their knowledge as such.
Yeah, but there was also the imagination of the general public, because this was all brand new to Tom and Jimmy and Mary. What was happening was beyond their wildest dreams in terms of, is this going to happen in my lifetime? And all of a sudden it arrived here from foreign parts without much, I would imagine, without much warning that it was all going to happen. One day there was nothing, and the next day there was television, so there was radios back in the day. And some of the stories we came across were very good, I have to say, yeah.
It was particularly interesting to hear that the radios and televisions, you couldn't go out and buy them because they cost so much money.
Yeah.
So they were like, I don't know, it was like maybe having a swimming pool or a jacuzzi or a helicopter or something like that. It was beyond the reach of most people. But
it was, yeah.
It spawned, I suppose, a number of businesses in Dundalk as a result.
Yeah, it brought people out of themselves too. Like some of the people we talked to didn't realise at the time what their own capabilities were. But do you mind if I go back one step here? When I told you that my answer initially was no, I am not doing that, like no.
That's right.
I'd like to tell you why I actually come back and said yes, if I may. Because I went away and I thought about this in two ways. I thought very genuinely that over the years, when I was doing other things like presentations at the town hall or the museum or wherever it was, and every single time I came in here and said, Alan, can you do this? Or can Dundalk FM help with this? I never heard the word no. It was always yes. And then there was always a development of that. And I suppose the relationship grew up between what I was trying to do, not necessarily the person, but what I was trying to do and present and record. I got total support. And all of a sudden I'm feeling guilty. But by the guilt, I also then began to see, I did a little bit of research in the mind and looked at a few things. And I began to see the value of what was actually out there. And they're the two reasons, and I want to put them on record. They're the two reasons why I came back in and said yes, out of gratitude for what was done for the previous things I did, and out of my own enthusiasm then for what you were trying to do. I thought that deserved support. And then, as I say, the rest was history.
It did indeed, yeah. Like that idea, would it still be sitting there, and I wouldn't have done anything with it, to be honest. I don't think I would because you were coming in with lists and lists of people that you knew or that you knew through somebody else, and then suddenly there was a whole kind of a chapter and verse of what a documentary might look like, but a documentary might only be 25 minutes or 50 minutes, and we decided that's not really the name of this project. It wasn't
the name of this story
at all. No.
The more we got into the little bit of research and then more research, the better the thing became, and it became quite big actually. And the thing I found then was you weren't just researching that name from back in the day, you were actually talking to their families. And I found that the enthusiasm that were within the families of these people, the children of these people, and even the grandchildren, was absolutely enormous and superb. And the way they got so excited about it, and the way they would say, yeah, leave that with me, I have a story, I'll be back. And all of a sudden I found this is much bigger than maybe even you thought. And it was certainly bigger than I had imagined. And that's where I think it has transpired to now.
I think it has, and I'm going to ask you about the research in a second. But I did make 1 or 2 phone calls myself. I made a call to Tom Lamb and to Damien Halpenny, and I think the conversation with Damien was about 43 minutes,
Nice
and
one.
Tom was probably similar. So that shows a certain amount of, what's the word, goodwill, of course, but like a desire or a need to go back and revisit, I suppose, their youth in a sense, but also to bring the story, to be a part of the bigger story maybe. But tell me about the research that you did, and particularly about the responses that you got maybe from ringing up people who you didn't know.
Oh, the research I did is there's a whole lot of ways of doing it, Alan. There's simply walking around the town and seeing what's there, or trying to remember the names of the shops or whatever it was that were there, and as you said, the manufacturers. And without reading the big long list, we'll get through it in a moment, but I also got great support from the reference library. And they're very good down there, and I want to give them the credit for that. And like you, they never say no either. And you go into all sorts of old documentations and you talk to people. And every one of those avenues will open up new opportunities. But like then when you walk around town, or remember, look at old photographs. And I've quite a few old books at home about Dundalk this and Dundalk that and Dundalk the other.
The railway and...
Oh, railway and yeah.
Carol's baby.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in there you find like old comments or old advertisements. So I got a whole lot of old advertisements for shops, and they showed me the name of the shop, the product they were selling, like the Pi television or the Reynolds or the Nordmendy or the, I suppose, Philips. There was a whole lot of them there too. And then you'd see the advertisements. And in the advertisements in the papers, you'd find out how much they were charging per week. And just you become immersed in the whole thing then. And one shop is charging 7 and 6pence, and the other shop is charging 6 and 7pence, or whatever it might be.
So the research really took place, I suppose, during July and August. And Frank, when you got up in the morning, you probably had a couple of thoughts over a cup of tea.
Yeah, how to wash the dishes and that sort of stuff.
Where is this going?
Yeah.
And how big will it get? So do you remember kind of the initial... You talked about having a look at the desk research as such, looking at the old books and going to the library.
And what happened then, Alan, you get a little lead, and you'd follow the lead up. And I have to say, one of the first leads I got was very intriguing. It was a place called W.P. Baldwin's in Bridge Street that I had never heard of. I found an old photograph. That was a photograph that was taken way back in 1936. And they had old radios. With these, the radios worked on batteries and stuff like that I didn't know anything about. By the way, I still don't know anything about them, you know. Yeah. But I shook the branches a wee bit, and I actually found a guy there who put me in touch with somebody else. And this gentleman that he put me in touch with, that I spoke to, was in England. The gentleman was in Crewe, actually, right? Okay. I got a telephone number for him, and I rang him up, and I sort of introduced myself, not knowing what sort of a reaction I would get, because I didn't know who I was speaking to or whether he was even the right person. All of a sudden, he was into overdrive. He was, yes, I'm from Dundalk, and my father was, let me tell you about him, and he was in this, and he was in the Royal Air Force, and he worked in Harland Wolff's, and that was when the war came, and he went out of business in Dundalk because of this reason and that reason. And I said, hold on a wee minute. I said, you might be asking, what age are you? And he said, well, actually, I'm 95. And I have to say, he was excellent. And now I could go on for 10 minutes about him, but I won't. But to summarise him up, he was very helpful, very enthusiastic, and he says to me, I want to know about this. And whatever it is you're doing with your local community radio station, because I told him who you were and what you were doing, he says, I want to know, I want to hear it. And you know, Alan, on the day before we had a night down in the museum, he actually tried to come over to Ireland. Yeah. So whatever we do, I think we have to include him in it. Yeah. But that was motivational for me too. And then I went to, is it Pete Traynor.
And did you know Pete before this?
No.
So you just went in
Just the door? Walked in and said, hello Pete, how you doing?
Had you been in Pete's shop before?
No, never even met
Same
him.
as most of us, we passed it 100 times
Absolutely,
a year,
because I was born and bred in Dowdall's Hill, and I used to walk in and out past it. And there's an actual, as I remember, I knew his father. Not knew him to speak to because he was old and I was a child, but I knew him, and I knew about the dog outside, and I walked past the old gasworks. So I went in and told Peter what we were doing. All of a sudden, he's all enthusiastic as well, and began to tell me the story. And I asked him the story about the gasworks, and he was full of enthusiasm too. And it went on from there. And then you'd pick up something else, or he might say to me, "Do you know your man?" Whoever that might be.
And did he give you a few links or a few leads?
Yeah, I did. Oh, yeah. And this is what happened. At the end, everybody was talking about everybody else. And it dawned on me that while they might have been business people against one another in business, not against one another personally, back in the time, they were very, very pro, do you know that person? And I'd like you to include him, or you'll get a great story from her, or whatever it might have been. And no matter where I went, I found that sort of family, community-orientated attitude. It was very good, actually.
And was there anyone else then that you rang, like a cold call, that you would have never spoken to before, but knew of them?
Well, there was people that our listeners will know, like John McCardle. And I knew a wee bit about them from the effort I made on Park Street. It's people in its history some years ago, but I never met the family. But then all of a sudden I realised that I'd known John's son for a long time without knowing who he was.
Right.
And I got talking to John up in Oriel Park one night, and he says, yeah, but my sister would be better. So I got an address for the sister, and I rang her up. And I didn't know her from Adam. She's a girl from Belfast, would you believe? And her name was Deirdre Lacey McCardle. And she was full of enthusiasm. And so much so that if I could skip forward to the night we had, I know we're coming back to it, in the museum, she came down here with her husband, all enthusiastic. And then it dawned on me, when we did the thing on Park Street, she was down in Park Street, which highlighted to me that she was very interested in the whole thing. And she gave me lovely stories too.
Very good. And then some of the other people that came in, like my own dad, and then Tom Lamb, Damien Halfpenny, Terry Sloan, Brian O'Neill, the McLaughlin brothers, John and James.
Well, I'll start with where you started.
Yeah.
Your dad and Damien Halfpenny and Terry Sloan and Tom Lamb and Des O'Loughlin. All these people worked for GEC in Dunleer and Reynolds in Dundalk. And even I didn't know as much as I know now about Reynolds and Dundalk and the outstanding company they were. I'm sure every company that existed in the 60s and the 70s and the 50s, I'm sure they could be criticised for not being professional at that or not knowing about that. But they were the days these factories lived in. They were the days that these people who organised the factories and worked in them, everybody was learning. And it's to their credit that they were able to make a success of it. The stories from the GEC, from the people you mentioned, and the Reynolds, I'll just be delighted when they come on the air in a few weeks' time and our listeners can hear them because they're quite intriguing. They were excellent stories, actually.
I was just driving in there tonight, and it's dark, and the lights in the Carroll's factory are on. They're never usually on, but you're doing a bit of work. And the cars everywhere, and it just looks as if Dundalk is nearly like a mini city, an industrious city. So when you think back to all the different electronics or international companies that were here during that time, and Reynolds and GEC were one of them, and two of them, it seemed like a town that never slept, because there was always comings and goings or deliveries. And
developing, Alan, because there was a great story. I'm giving little trailers, I suppose, here, but Damien Halfpenny told a lovely story about his time at work. But then the conversation went round to the arrival of the Regional Technical College. And I asked him during our interview, did that make a big difference to the town of Dundalk? And he went overboard to tell me how important it was and the difference it made and the education it brought to the young people of Dundalk, who then were able to go out and work in the factories. So at that stage, these young people coming from our new young college, they were taking newness and new ideas with them and full of enthusiasm. So you're right, the town of Dundalk was growing all the time. And I suppose if you go back into the history of the town too, from an industrial point of view, a lot of it came from the GNR. So that was a type of work. It was coach building and it was engineering and stuff. And all that grew, but then all the other industries came in as well. Like you had Accuray and all these other people, tremendous companies. But anyway. Well, there was another interview that I found very good, because this was a neighbour of mine, actually, Sean McLaughlin. I knew Sean's children growing up as 10, 12 and 14 and 16-year-olds, but didn't really know them as adults. I rang James up one night and told him what we were doing, because he and his brother John, they came down to the Park Street thing because the dad had the shop, Sean McLaughlin, 100 Park Street, Dundalk, Universal Radio and Television.
Really stood out.
Absolutely, yeah. And the stories they told, and like I remember yourself and myself, we were in the studio that night recording them, and there was great laughter about the stories and the pride that was in their voice when they were talking about them, and the things they did, and somebody knocking his front door at Christmas Day at lunchtime saying, my television's gone. And him, like a whole lot of other people in the Dundalk, they actually give the televisions out to their customers on Christmas Day.
Yes,
it doesn't get much better than that.
Did you tell me James is looking to give in a couple of radios? Did you say that to me?
Yeah, when we were talking about like all the old things, because part of what we were trying to do through your own innovation too was gather a number of old pieces of equipment. Mm-hmm. And I said it to James, I think, and he says, I have something at home. Mm. But what he had done the previous week, actually, of his own initiative, is he'd left 3 or 4 old television sets down in the museum. So then I went down to the museum and I asked Brian below. And again, I want to emphasise here that Brian and the people in the museum, they were outstandingly helpful to us when we were doing all this. The girls were full of enthusiasm down there, and straight away they said, oh, come on till I show you this. Mm-hmm. They forgot my wife was sitting in the car outside waiting, We went in and we looked around their stores, which is just class place. You could spend hours and hours in there. And they had lots of old televisions and old radios. And again, jumping forward to the night we had down in the museum, they were all on display.
That's
and
right, yeah.
It was lovely to see them, really nice.
Brought back all the memories. Just moving on to the night in the museum. We recorded a good number of interviews here in the reception area of the studio, and some in the studio as well. Can you remember where the idea of hosting an event and bringing these people together came from, and what the benefit of doing something like that would be?
Yeah, I think what we said there was we can't stop by having interviews with people and then walking away from it and letting the people to walk away from it. I think we felt that if there was any way we could get these people together, and then we put together a slideshow. So yourself and myself, we sat down, and what we decided to do was have an evening in the museum, but I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but invitation only. Mm-hmm. Because I felt that if we opened this up to the general public, you could have 300 or 400, literally, 100 people there. So what we decided to do was we'd invite all these people along, and we'd do a slideshow for them, and then we'd use the slideshow by putting the slide up about Sean McLaughlin or whoever, and then have a conversation with Sean's family who were there on the night. And for all the people we interviewed, almost without exception, they all came to that.
That's true. Yeah.
And we were able to ask them questions, probably questions that they already answered in the interviews. But because we were doing it early in the sequence of programmes, we give them the questions we were going to answer them, and they answered them. I think everybody in the audience that night was interviewed.
That's right.
And I don't want to make the audience sound huge. It was probably only about 40 or 50 people.
Right. Yes.
But they were all people who were involved in the situation. Yeah. And they just loved it, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah. I suppose behind the scenes, there was conversations between myself and yourself of how to organise this, because you didn't want people sitting there all night. You wanted as many people to be involved. You didn't want to repeat the questions. And if everybody was to be asked, you probably nearly needed to limit the time as well. So how did we approach that?
With an axe. I think what we said was, we were confined to time, and like everybody had to gather 2 or 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. So the way we did it was very politely. We went to the people before the event and said, if you don't mind, John, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. There's your questions. And we are for time, so you have to be a wee bit precise. And they all understood that. And yes, we did give them out their questions in advance. I'm not sure if they looked at the questions, but the point was it was in the mind. Uh-huh. And they knew where we were both coming from. So when the point in time came to ask them questions, they were ready for the specific question. They weren't hemming and hawing, and they had the answers. And
did everybody have the questions? Because it seemed to flow, because you would have we'd worked out the different slides, and we thought that GC and Reynolds should have prominence as such, and devote more time to those, and then work away on the rest of the slides. If you were to run it again, would you do anything different, or were you just pleased the way it worked out?
Well, when you do a project of this nature, of any nature, you have to look back and say, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, how can we improve? So if we did that, which I'm not going to do in front of the microphone tonight, we would see there was different ways of doing things, or we might have improved this. But I have to say, I think everybody, myself included and yourself, we came out of that event that night very happy, because be it by design or fluke, everybody got speaking. Nobody was left out. Everybody was very proficient at coming up with their answers. I thought they were excellent in actual fact. They were all very happy. And then they spent time talking to one another. And the thing that came back to me after that was the way they all came back and said it was great to talk to all the other people. So, yes, there would be things you'd change, but I think it was... Yeah, for a first shot, it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, well, I was listening to the din and the buzz upstairs in the museum, and these, I suppose, elderly men and women, they're standing there and they're surrounded by a circle of old televisions as such, and yet the conversations, I don't know what the conversations were, but there was a great din, and even afterwards, then there was a cup of tea as well. There was people hanging on as well, and I always love to hear that in a conversation in a group, and hopefully, people will get a chance to meet up again somewhere along the line. But one of the suggestions you made was to email everybody and just ask them what they thought of the evening, and to give some feedback or some testimonials. So, what kind of response did you get?
Very good response. I suppose if you email 30 people, 30 are not going to respond to you. And in a situation like this, there's nobody going to respond and say a bad thing, I suppose. That's human nature. But I felt that the response we got very heartwarming, actually. And you could feel they came from the people in a very genuine way. I'll give you a couple of examples if I can think of them. Tom Lamb, the gentleman you mentioned there, Tom said it was a great evening. It was great to meet friends and people from bygone days and to catch up on old times. He said that everybody I spoke to really enjoyed the night, and he thought it was a great idea, and hopefully it will be well received by the listening public when the time comes to broadcast it. He was talking about his time back there, but there was one set of circumstances, well, two actually, but there was nobody that gave a testimonial that you couldn't say that was perfect, that was very good. But there was a couple of very good ones, because there was a gentleman by the name of Seamus Fox that we interviewed, his family. And Seamus unfortunately died as a young married man, and he left 4 children behind him. And 2 of them were there in the night, John and his sister Margaret. I think John was 14. If it's all right to say this on the air tonight, that when his dad died, and Margaret was a bit younger. So, like they put their testimonial together, and they came back and they said, "Thank you very much for the invite to the Dundalk Radio and Television People programme. We thoroughly enjoyed the evening and was delighted to be part of it. It meant so much to us to hear from people who actually walked alongside our dad, and the respect that they had for him. It was fascinating to hear everyone else's stories and feel the passion that was around TV and radio in Dundalk at the time, and also to look back at the technology. Whoa, how things have moved on. It was great to see the history revived, and thanks to evenings like this that gather like-minded people together and reminisce and keep the past alive. I look forward to hearing the broadcasts." But what they were hearing that night, Alan, was stories about their father that they never heard before. Whereas other people like Tom and your dad and people, they were talking about what they knew and reliving those memories. But these 2 young people, they were hearing things about their dad they never knew because they didn't know him long enough and old enough in life. And it was heartwarming to hear what they had to say. And on the night, just to hear the feelings about what they said, Yeah,
there was a lot of people speaking from the heart. I suppose nostalgia for days gone by, especially, I suppose you could say the children, but most of these children were maybe in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Catching up on the rest of us, yeah. And not leaving anybody out, because quite a few people sent in lovely comments back, and you can't go through them all, but just to put on record that what they said is very much appreciated, and to a large extent makes the making of these programmes all the more worthwhile when you realise what people actually get out of them.
Yeah, just looking back, the AV Theatre gave a chance for everybody to give, to give their thoughts on it, rather than just in an interview situation. They could say out loud in front of 40 other people some of the stories. Some of them were funny, hilarious. There was some great storytellers in there, and then others were really, heartfelt and deep meaning. It does go back to a time, perhaps, which was life was simpler in one ways, maybe when the children and the parents sat down and watched television together. That doesn't happen anymore. So, and prior to that, perhaps the family might have sat down and listened to the radio. That doesn't happen anymore. So we're delving right back into a different society as such. Might say it's changed for the worse, or maybe it's changed for the better in different ways. I know parents or grandparents nowadays ask all the youngsters when there are problems with their laptop or their phone, can you help me? So there's time there to get
the parents and the grandparents say, I can't help you, But what I felt about that night, and if you go back a few minutes, we were talking about why did we put on that night. One of the reasons we put on that night actually worked out very well for us, because we weren't just doing the cold interview. We were then coming back to the warmth of people talking to one another. Yeah. And they all said on the night, as I'm repeating myself now, but it was great to meet all these people again and hear the stories. And hear the stories firsthand, not on the radio 2 months down the road, and then be able to go over to that person and say, is that what it was all about? Yes. Or is that how my father was?
Yes.
And I suppose everybody was finding out things that night, but yeah, I thought that really worked out well. Good. But the other thing too is, my wife said it to me in the conversation the other night, our young people, our children, our grandchildren, they're not living in my world, or my wife's world, or your world. They are living in their own world now, and it's different. And what happened in the museum that night, I felt that the vast majority of the people were there were going back into their childhood. Maybe they were 20 or 30, but they were going back years and years. So they were enjoying reminiscing and remembering their own lives. And if this programme hadn't been done, a lot of the people we spoke to wouldn't have dug up, if that's the word, the memories that's embedded in their brains. Yes, and I thought that was brilliant for them as well.
Yeah. And the memories that are probably embedded in their attics as well, because they've lots of books and different bits and pieces of radios that are still up there. Yeah,
that's right.
Frank, it's been an absolute pleasure over the last, 13, 14 weeks for the duration of this project. And for me, seeing people coming in and having a conversation and then doing an interview in the studio here has just been absolutely marvellous, and it wouldn't have happened without you. Just want to thank you very much for that.
I wouldn't go that far. I know you're being very generous, but you did play a huge part yourself. And I have to say too, Dundalk FM as an institution, or whatever the word is, that what you're doing here to be able to bring this to the people of Dundalk, the local people, and I think it opens the door for us as well.
Mm-hmm. Good. There's lots more ideas. Next time I ask you, Frank, I can expect a no.
I can guarantee you no, but you might get a yes after that,
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
The series, Dundalk's Radio and Television People, was researched and presented by Frank O'Callaghan and recorded and edited by Alan Byrne.